That's him, not me.
That was me doing that.
I want to welcome all of you for coming to the library tonight for our program on the presidential visits on the train whistle stop. If you've not been in the library before, you are sitting in our new edition. We have been in this part for about a year now. We're very pleased to be able to have this because we can have programs like this because we have more space and more room to seat people. We last year applied for an America 250 grant. We received that, and this is part of that grant, this program we're doing. We did a program in the fall for veterans, and Sandy Schaefer did a program for us. It was very nice, brought all her stuff in, and we thank you for that. And then we had approached Ron. We thought a big part of Deshler is trains, and a very unique part of Deshler and trains are the presidential visits that we've had come through Deshler. So we had approached Ron, and he was very gracious. He has put a lot of time, research into this project. We appreciate all of his efforts that he's done. Looking forward, the third part of our grant is our summer reading program, and we are doing America's 250. We're doing a big, giant summer birthday party for the kids for America, so that'll be fun. But so if you don't know Ron, this is Ron Buddy. Very, what's the word I want to use?
Busy.
Smart, very very educated in the history of Deshler, so we thought he would be you would love having him speak with you today on this topic. He's going to talk, and if you have questions, feel free to ask. Ron will do our best to answer. Most likely it's going to be Ron, not me. But so, Brad? Oh, and before we start, there's about 7 or 8 chairs up front here. There's about 10. Here. If anybody wants to move closer to be able to hear better, see better, feel free. There's a bunch of seating up here.
Plus they're upholstered.
Yeah, and these are soft, people. They are soft. But yeah, so feel free to move if you need to. Okay, Ron?
Yeah, you might settle in for a glorious 3-hour extravaganza. No, it's not going to take that long. The things I found out in researching this, I spent about the whole blasted winter up here. You know, I'd walk in the door and they'd say, "Oh, here he comes again." You know, so I'd be back over in my little corner going through all the old little Deshler flags. So I started as early as I could. And what's bad is the first guy I'm going to talk about came before they had any Deshler flags on their microfilm back there. So I couldn't find out anything about him other than stuff I could find on the internet. But as we went on, I checked every 4 years, a presidential year, through all the Deshler flags, like starting in like late September through election day. And that's how I could find out if a president came here or didn't come here. Because a lot of people said presidents came, that no, they did not come to Deshler, according to the Deshler flag of the time. So we'll find out as we go along here, if you guys will test your memory and see what your parents and grandparents told you, and we'll find out if it's true or not. But I want to touch a little bit before I pull that up on whistle stop history. Whistle stop campaigns were originated by William Henry Harrison back in 1840. However, the first special train that was hired for purely political purposes was by Stephen Douglas. That was Abraham Lincoln's opponents in the great debates. In his 1858 senatorial campaign, he used a train that pulled a cannon along. And as he would pull into the town, this cannon would shoot blanks off and everything, and that's how he announced his arrival. Can you imagine doing that today? I can't envision it, but they did it. Okay, the first guy we've got. So let's get it started, and then I'm going to click from there on. Double click. Make it full. There you go. William Jennings Bryan. Some of you have heard of him, some of you have not heard of him. On October 19th, 1896, William Jennings Bryan, a Democrat, stopped in Deshler on the old CH&D, which is the Cincinnati, Hamilton, and Dayton line, and made a campaign speech, one of over 600 speeches that he made during that 1896 campaign, which he lost to William McKinley. The route started in Toledo, making stops at Perrysburg, Deshler, Ottawa, Columbus Grove, Lima, Wapakoneta, and then it continued on south. That year, he traveled over 18,000 miles on his campaign, and he spoke to approximately 5 million people. Now, think back then, 5 million people, that was an awful lot of people. And that was in 27 states. He ran for president again in 1900, losing again to William McKinley, and then he ran again in 1908, and he lost to William Howard Taft that year. In 1925, you probably know this, he was the prosecutor in the Scopes monkey trial, where educator John Scopes was on trial for teaching Darwinism, or evolution, which violated Tennessee laws that prohibited teaching it. You might remember this was dramatized in the movie Inherit the Wind. So, and the actor that portrayed him was Frederick March. I didn't think it was Frederick March that played him. I thought it was Spencer Tracy or somebody like that, but no, it was not him. Okay, so this is the train that he used. This is just not Deshler. This is another stop in Ohio that he did, and I love the hats. They really, everybody has a hat. This was, it started with a W, and I can't remember the town, but it's like Willisburg it's not Williamsburg, but it had a Williamsport. I should have wrote it down, obviously.
It looks like it's by a lake.
But it does. It looks like that looks like a lake right there. It's got to be a lake. But this would have been what he did. They had a special platform that came out on there. Look at the hundreds of people that are there. And this is him. That's William Jennings Bryan. And it's probably, I'm going to guess, it does not say in the picture when I pulled it up, but that's him at the convention, I'm sure. Teddy Roosevelt and William Jennings Bryan again. While there was nothing reported in the Deshler flag in 1900, it's very probable that both Bryan and Teddy Roosevelt, who was McKinley's running mate, passed through Deshler but did not stop. We were located as the crossroads of the B&O in the center of the north-south routes as well as the east-west routes. My research using the internet showed this as being probable. I could not find anything in the Deshler flag that said, yep, Teddy Roosevelt stopped here. I checked with an AI thing that you go on your phone on that day. It said, yep, he stopped in Deshler. We know he did, but you can't trust the AI stuff all the time on your telephone. So I don't think they stopped. I think they passed through. Calvin Coolidge. While not technically a whistle stop, on Tuesday, June 14th, 1927, at 10:53 in the morning, President Coolidge, his wife, entourage, and pets, two collies named Rob Roy and Prudence Prim, Mrs. Coolidge's canaries, their pet raccoon Rebecca, stopped here, and they came out on the rear of the train for an appearance on their way to the Badlands of South Dakota for a 3-month stay. 3 months he went out to there just to have a vacation, which included the dedication of Mount Rushmore. Now this was 1927, so he was dedicating the beginning of it, not the end, because I think it was, you have to correct me if I'm wrong, 1934 I think is when it was finished. So I thought it took 7 years, but I honestly, I don't know that for sure. So they were there for 10 minutes and no speech was given. The flag at the time stated that approximately 300 people greeted the President and Mrs. Coolidge with loud applause and waving handkerchiefs. One of the colleagues came out on the platform, started barking. The President quieted him down, and then before you knew it, he waved, said goodbye, and a train was headed off to the west. The flag stated that seeing the President and the First Lady was a great source of great satisfaction to all. Now that's the flag at the time putting a really nice spin on it. That's the train. This would be the train. Now this was when they reached they're in South Dakota. They were getting off the trains there. And then they're just taking some pictures. And this is him giving a dedication speech at Mount Rushmore. And there are the two white collies. I just found this picture this week. Now, however, because remember, let's say the Deshler flag put a real positive spin on this stuff. 21 years later, in 1948, as the town was getting ready for the upcoming stop by Harry Truman, the editor of the flag, and it has in his editor's column, Corn City Colonels, relates a slightly humorous story related to the Coolidge visit. I quote, "A fine woman whose subscription card dates back through several different publishers of the flag dropped in Thursday afternoon to exchange pleasantries and reminisce on the time that President Coolidge's train stopped here. It seems that the president and his wife were on a vacation trip to North Dakota." He's got that wrong because it was South Dakota. "Since it was generally known that the train was to make a stop here, about 200 Deshlerites turned out to see their chief executive. The train pulled in. The president and Mrs. Coolidge, accompanied by their two white collies, them, appeared on the rear platform. With an economy of words," I love how these guys wrote back then. "With an economy of words characteristic of the Vermonter, the president introduced his wife and then stood silent. Deshlerites looked at him expectantly. The chief executive stooped from one and petted one of his dogs, saying nothing. Members of his audience shifted nervously from one foot to another in embarrassment as the moments of silence seemed to grow into ages. Occasionally he would stoop and stroke one of the collies, and then finally the train left. Our friend said she was never so embarrassed in all her life." So the flag back then said it was wonderful, it was great, all these people came out waving handkerchiefs and everything, and the lady recalls it as like an embarrassing thing that nobody talked and nobody said and nobody did anything.
Who was that editor?
I don't know his
Does it
name.
say that?
No. Well, it says it if I would look it up,
Oh.
and I should have written it down, but and he was editor all through World War II because of all of because there's a couple books, I'm diverging off, there's a couple of books they have here in the library that were assembled all the letters home to the Deshler flag, and this guy, this guy was the editor at the time.
And orchestrated that?
Yep. Franklin D. Roosevelt. Local legend has it that FDR came through Deshler in 1932. I could not find any Deshler flags that mentioned him passing through in any of his campaigns, all of them. I checked on the internet and could only find that it was probable that he passed through, but not stopping. So I'm going to bet that he probably did not stop. I'm going to guess he went through and just, people's memories are, what they are. Okay, Herbert Hoover. There was, however, in 1932, same year, a mention in the Deshler flag that Herbert Hoover was due to pass through town on Friday, November 4th. That was to happen at 3 o'clock in the morning, the middle of the night, so they didn't think anyone would be out to see it. Just the Saturday before that, someone pulled 67 spikes from the inside tracks on a high curve in Athens, Ohio. Experts said angle iron fortunately held the track in place. But if it would have been the outside tracks, the train surely would have crashed down the 30-foot embankment. So, yeah, we had some political hijinks that could have been a whole other story there. But, see, right there, I even got it said 40-foot embankment. I said 30-foot embankment. So, he went through, but he did not stop either. This guy, however, did stop. And I'm going to bet a lot of you don't know who he is. It's Colonel Frank Knox, and I did not know who he is, and I found out an awful lot about this guy. In 1936, Republican candidate for president Alf Landon's running mate, Colonel Frank Knox, stopped in Deshler to give a speech to approximately 500 people. It was Wednesday morning, September 30th. The train was headed south on the Toledo division of the B&O line. He spoke of the many conflicts in Europe at the time, 1936, and warned that all Americans should be on guard lest they lose their liberty. He also made the unusual claim, this blows my mind, he made the unusual claim that the Democratic Party, now remember, he was the Republican candidate, the Democratic Party platform of the current administration, FDR, was one of the best platforms of any political party that was impregnable from an economic standpoint. But FDR's abandonment of it had kept America in the Depression longer than was necessary. So he's toting the party line. But, you know, I found out a lot about this guy. He ended up, and he was one of Teddy Roosevelt's Rough Riders. He was the publisher of the Chicago Daily News. And then he was kind of a guy that was like really pushing for a buildup of the Navy prior to Pearl Harbor. And so he ended up, and he was on FDR's cabinet in 1940, prior to Pearl Harbor. FDR assembled a team of rivals. He wanted guys that would challenge him. So Frank Knox was one of these Republicans that he put in his cabinet. And so then he became Secretary of the Navy. And they ended up being good friends, even though he like slammed them 4 years ago. And that's just politics. So that's what he was doing. And he died in 1944 while he was still in office. Now, this is him being sworn in as Secretary of the Navy. And then this is December 15th of 1941. So he went, after December 7th, he went out to Pearl Harbor, he inspected everything, he got facts and figures and notes, he came back, and this is him giving his press briefing about what happened in Pearl Harbor that he found, like how many were killed, how many boats were sunk, things like that. So he was really an active guy. Harry Truman. This is Harry Truman's first stop. In 1948, on Monday, October 11th, Harry Truman made Deshler a stop on his whistle-stop campaign for re-election. This stop was a little different from the others, that the train came from the south and went around the Y and headed to the west. Whoop! Headed to the east to Fostoria. East. He was going to Fostoria and stopped in what the editor called the rear of the flag block. So that would be where, kind of where the fire department is and Megan Yarnell's thing and the post office and that, back there, behind that. This stop was at 3:04 in the afternoon and school was let out early so students could see the president. The editor said it looked like all of the law west of the Pecos. I like that. These guys really right. Assembled at the Y. He went on to write, though the applause according to the president was courteous, it was not deafening. Go figure. However, Mr. Truman thanked the estimated 2,000 people for the reception given to him and said that such fine welcomes had been accorded him all over the state. Some of the Deshlerites that were called forward to meet the president were Mayor D.A. Holder, Ralph Brown, Louis Blue, Mr. and Mrs. Ralph Ewing, and Mr. and Mrs. Ronald Thatcher. He went on to write, almost wistfully, the president requested a selection from the Deshler School Band. As the pupils readily obliged, the train started moving slowly down the east track, with the chief executive smiling happily and waving farewell. The time was 3:18, so 14 minutes was all longer it was. In the editor's Corn City Colonels column, still the same guy, Corn City Colonels, he praised some local unsung heroes for the Truman visit. His first nomination for unsung heroes was J.R. McAllister, who was a dispatcher who had to control all of the trains from his tower and had only been on the job for a couple of weeks. He had to stop all of the traffic until the presidential train is on its way. Now remember, because people would have, back there, they would have just been all over the tracks. I mean, they would have probably been on the north-south tracks, the east-west tracks, everywhere. A train would have just plowed them out. So he had to stop all the traffic, and they did used to do that. I mean, I can remember in the 80s when I was in charge of like the Halloween parade, I could go up into that little tower and I could say, hey, can you hold the trains for like, a half hour till we get our Halloween parade? And they would do it. It was a little bit different time, so it was not so computerized where everything is done way remotely. So the editor stated that he was probably one of the youngest dispatchers in the country. There were also two men with the last names of Freytag and Baldwin who had to place the ropes in the proper spot for crowd control, which wasn't an easy task with the train stopping on the Y. They figured the length of the train and they knew how many cars there were. They knew the measurement of those cars, so they calculated all of that and they put a flag down there and that's told them where to stop. Now, they figured the length to almost within an inch, and when it rolled up and stopped, the crowd did not even have to move a step. The editor also couldn't write the story and take pictures at the same time, so he listed Dick and Johnny Caldwell. I like Johnny Caldwell. Because they were younger, they were just young guys then, to take pictures. The boys did a fine job, and even though they were kept behind the ropes and were eyed suspiciously by the security men, then Johnny Hochschild, he called him Johnny Hochschild, I always just thought it was John Hochschild, he called him Johnny Hochschild, rushed through the prints just in time to make the current edition of the flag. So these were some of the pictures that he took, and obviously you can see just how bad they are. Wait till you see the pictures that John took the next trip that Truman makes. But this is the one where because he's got his presidential seal. This is from 48. So
Ron?
then, Harry Truman again.
Ron,
Yes.
I was there.
Were you really? Anybody else there?
1 year old.
1 year old.
So you remember it well, huh?
Yeah, it was a good day. Harry Truman again in 1952. On the afternoon of Monday, October 27th, President Harry Truman made a return trip to Deshler to campaign for Democratic nominee Adlai Stevenson. In the October 23rd edition of the flag, it was announced that he would be stopping on the morning of, remember this, Friday, October 31st. Friday. But the article stated that the flag was told later that he would not be stopping in Deshler after all. It was then stated again in the same article that 4 years ago, and that President Truman had been so happy with his stop in Deshler on a similar campaign that in all probability the stop would be made. So I guess nobody really knew whether he was going to stop or not. So what happens? He stops on Monday the 27th. A crowd estimated at 1,500 people greeted him at 438 at the intersection of Kaiser Avenue and the B&O right-of-way. They were headed west. I got it right this time. They were headed west with the final destination reaching his home in Independence, Missouri a few days later.
I could see that the flag cost 5 cents.
Did it? 5 cents, yeah, for the Deshler flag. But, see, now these are the pictures John took 4 years later. Because the library was donated all of John's slides and negatives and everything that he had. They gave them to me. I took them home, and then I scanned in what I wanted, and I came across all of these right there. Stevenson. So you can see that's from there. So John got a little bit better spot. He's up quite a bit closer. So that's his daughter coming out. Of course, I'm getting ahead of myself. He brought his daughter Margaret with him, and she is shown in these photos. He spoke for approximately 5 minutes about how well the farmers had done the previous few decades under Democratic leadership, which coincidentally was the focus of his speech 4 years prior. He then made mention of his pleasure in again visiting Deshler, which he remembered from a similar campaign for election. After bringing out his daughter Margaret to a warm greeting, numerous leading Democrats from the area were able to meet and shake hands with the president, including Deshlerites Raymond Dishon, Ronald Thatcher, and the publisher of the flag at the time, J.H. Pinkstone. Now that's not the Corn City Colonels guy. He's the next one. But Okay, 1960 with Richard Nixon. Yes, Richard Nixon was here in 60 before 68. A lot of people forgot that. Everybody remembers, oh, 68, all the famous stuff. No, he was here in 60 when he was running against John F. Kennedy. At 7 p.m. on Wednesday, October 26, 1960, arriving over an hour late, Vice President Richard Nixon spoke to approximately 6,000 people, topics being farming, it's always about farming, and world peace. John Clayton was instrumental in getting the train to stop here because the original announcement from the state GOP headquarters only listed Lima and Toledo as stops on this trip. John and other local Republican leaders rode with Mr. Nixon on the train from Lima to Deshler. 8 area bands kept the crowd in a festive mood during the long wait. From the expected 5, they were supposed to be here at 5:50 and he did not get here till 7 o'clock. John introduced Congressman Delbert Latta, who then in turn introduced Mr. Nixon. A special feature was the presentation to the Vice President of a Deshler mailbox filled with letters from a Nixon fan club of young Deshler girls. There's the mailbox right there. That's Karen Sunderman, Karen Gribble. The third girl, those girls were Karen Gribble, I'm going to give you their maiden names, Sandy Buddy, who is in our crowd today, Linda Sigler, and Nancy Gribble. The Findlay Republican Courier stated that Mrs. Nixon was very attentive to the group of girls because they were about the same age as their 2 daughters. The chrysanthemums that Mrs. Nixon is holding in this picture was presented to her by Gussie Collier. Now, is Gussie Collier?
John's grandma.
Okay, that's what I wondered.
Yeah.
Mr. Nixon also recognized the delegation from Defiance and mentioned his honorary degree from Defiance College. I didn't know that. The stop lasted 15 minutes and he was off to Toledo. And this, Sandy got this autographed picture sent. You got that in the mail? And a letter too, I think. Goldwater, Barry Goldwater in 1964 on 7 p.m. on Wednesday, September 30th, 1964. Deshler was a campaign stop for Republican presidential candidate Barry Goldwater. He was running against the Democratic candidate, incumbent Lyndon B. Johnson. The train was about an hour and 20 minutes behind schedule, and he spoke to a crowd estimated at approximately 5,000 people. He spoke for 15 minutes about, guess what, farm policies, and mentioned a federal wheat policy which he felt was a cause for local farmers suffering under a price of only $1.30 a bushel for wheat. When he said, if I'm elected November 3rd, Secretary of Agriculture, Orville Freeman won't be the first to go, but he'll be the second. He drew the biggest round of applause when he said that. At most points during his talk, the cheers were mixed with boos from the Johnson faction. Bill, were you there? 1964.
Yes, of course.
And there was people held up HHH signs. Wait, wrong one. I'm getting ahead of myself. HHH is the other guy. There was some disappointment felt because the train stopped a little too far south for Senator Goldwater to see the large platform that was erected for the area Republican officers and workers. So all these guys are all standing up there real proud on the platform and everything, and the train is way down there. So I think those must not have been the same guys measuring the train to tell them where to stop. A special feature was the presentation of another Deshler mailbox from the local Republican committee. A group of girls, there's Goldwater, and there's the group of girls. From left to right in this photo, Becky Betts, Judy Bumbarger, Nancy Kennedy, Cheryl Fly, Nancy Wensink, and Vicki Howard.
No.
So that's
Howard! I got it. Didn't correct me. You know, I knew that too.
Don't write that on it.
So look at those hats.
Yeah, look at them.
Richard Nixon again. At 6:45 p.m. on Tuesday, October 22nd, 1968. Once again, Deshler was a campaign whistle stop for Republican candidate Richard Nixon. He was running against Democratic Vice President Hubert H. Humphrey. He spoke for 15 minutes and focused on farming and the troubles farmers faced with low grain prices. He also touched on his established positions on Vietnam, crime, and inflation. He was introduced by Congressman Delbert Latta, who also introduced Congressman Jackson Betts of Findlay, who was brother of Dr. Deshler's Dr. Thomas Betts, and also Pat Nixon and their daughters. Deshler was the 8th of 9 stops for the day, ending in Toledo. High school bands from Deshler, Pandora Gilboa, Paulding, and Archbold provided music. Editor Paul Scharf, now we're up to where everybody knows that editor, noted that there was no verbal heckling, but a few HHH signs were observed, and one asked, "Debate, why not?" At his As I See It column, Paul Scharf wrote, now this is, I thought, whoops, I gotta go back. I thought this was really cool. Lori, you'll probably, I said this, I was telling Connie about this at the musical there. She did not know this. John had never told her this. But in his As I See It, Paul Scharf wrote, several local party leaders, including John Collier of Deshler Sr. and Carrie Laub of Holgate, have worked hard for months on this project and were asked to join the campaign train in Lima and ride with the candidate to Deshler. They went to Lima and waited for the train at the B&O station, and they waited, and they waited, and they waited, and they waited. About the time the train got to Deshler, they discovered that the train had been routed out of Lima. Actually, Uniopolis. They moved it to Uniopolis on the DT&I tracks. Detroit, Toledo, and Ironton. Possibly for security reasons. It would have switched to the B&O south of Leipzig. If you're familiar with how that works down there, the B&O comes up, then the DT&I shoots off and it goes through West Leipzig, where the B&O keeps coming our way. There we were, Carrie told me, up a creek without a paddle. And then it was all over. The train left town, the campaign continued, and life went on as usual in Deshler until that nationally televised acceptance speech that made our town famous.
He is beaming, Pat Nixon is beaming. One can't help but think back to 1960 when a tearful Pat Nixon was choking back the emotions. And a totally different scene, of course, then. Here is possibly one of the most fantastic political comebacks in American history. I saw many signs in this campaign. Some of them were not friendly. Some were very friendly. But the one that touched me the most was one that I saw in Deshler, Ohio, at the end of a long day of whistle stop. A teenager held up the sign, "Bring us together." And that will be the great objective of this administration at the outset, to bring the American people together.
That was the speech. On the afternoon of Wednesday, November 6th, the day after he was elected president, Richard Nixon gave his acceptance speech in Madison Square Garden. In this speech, he made mention of a sign that was held in Deshler saying, "Bring us together," and declared that that was to be the theme of his presidency as he took office. Almost immediately, the search was on to find out who held the sign and the story behind it. In the November 7th issue of The Flag, published the next day, Paul Scharf, in his As I See It column, mentions that efforts to discover who the young person was with the now famous sign turned up no leads whatsoever. A school-wide intercom query at the Deshler School last week failed to turn up anyone who knew who the sign bearer might be. Last minute word is the togetherness sign was found on the street at the rally by Vicki Cole, age 14, daughter of Reverend David Cole of Deshler. In the following week's November 14th issue, it was confirmed that Vicky Cole was indeed the holder of the sign. Now I remember this because half the town claimed that they held it up. For some reason, I was up either in or by the flag office, and this kid come busting in. He says, "Yep, I'm the one who hold it. I did the sign. I can tell you, I'm the guy that did that." And then he asked him a couple questions, and the kid obviously didn't answer right, so it wasn't him. But it was going crazy, like trying to figure out who had this sign. Mr. Scharf wrote that many reporters, photographers, TV and radio men came to Deshler in unprecedented numbers last Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. All the major networks carried the story on their news shows. I remember this. Numerous Deshler citizens received phone calls from family and friends across the country. It was indeed a heady time for our little town. In his November 14th As I See It column, he states, "The story was a natural. The element of chance, or providence, was just enough to capture the nation's imagination." Now, this is kind of a fake picture. The picture that was in the flag is terrible. I mean, you couldn't even make it out. So I stole, it's this picture, but I stole this picture. You're going to see it in a little bit, and like superimposed it on this. So I did a little trickery in Photoshop. So, but it's a lot clearer that you can see it. And Dwayne Rickard, he did that. Consider a teenage girl in a Midwestern village, part of a crowd waiting in the dusk for the candidate's whistle stop, loses a sign that she had brought along, a rather ordinary sign reflecting the usual party sentiments. By chance, she sees another sign lying on the ground, picks it up, and holds it aloft. The candidate happens to see it among the hundreds of others, remembers its touching plea, and makes it his theme. Add to this chancy sequence of events the final happenstance that it took place in our town, and you can well understand the proud and happy faces of Deshlerites last week. Well, that wasn't the end of the story, because next, the Cole family was invited to the inauguration in Washington, D.C. In this picture, whoops, I gotta get it there. See, that's the picture. Somebody gave me, this is so great because all you guys give me all this stuff and I just put it in a box or do whatever and I scan it. This was a Christmas card that they sent out. The Coles did back in '68. So, that's a nice picture too. I wonder who took it. But in this picture from the flag, Vince Meyer, president of the Deshler Chamber of Commerce, is presenting the Coles a check for $731 to help defray expenses. Now, how did they get $31? Who gave $31? They went around to businesses and hit up and said, some guy says, "Yeah, I'll give you $31." That's like $731 to help defray expenses. The money was collected from Deshler businesses by a chamber committee. Mr. Meyer was the Metal Forge plant manager at the time. The Coles stood on the lead float in the inaugural parade. Later in the parade, the Ohio float depicted the Nixon campaign whistle stop, giving Deshler one last time in the spotlight. The Coles were guests of the inaugural committee and of the President and Mrs. Nixon from Friday until Tuesday of that week. So they were there for a while. They attended many inaugural events. In his January 9th As I See It column, Paul wrote, "We feel the people of the Deshler community owe a great deal to the Cole family for putting up so graciously with the flood of phone calls, letters, photographers, interviewers, and all the rest during the last 2 hectic months and through the inauguration ahead. They are paying the price for the fantastic national publicity our town continues to receive." After the inauguration, he wrote, "A Deshler merchant noted that there was hardly a Republican on the streets Monday afternoon inauguration day." We'd go further than that and say that most Deshlerites, regardless of party, who had access to a TV screen. I like that he had to say who had access to a TV screen. Not everybody had TVs back then. So, not like now. had access to a TV screen were watching during the ceremonies and the parade. Mostly, of course, watching for Vicky. 1984, Ronald Reagan. Now, anybody remember these guys? Herb Meyer, Clifford Freeman, and Les Noblin.
Yep.
They were interviewed in the restaurant. It's got to be the Crescent. It says Defiance, Ohio. So it's the Crescent. And there was a lot of things like that. I imagine I did not come across any articles that referenced all the hoopla in 1968. It just kind of dealt with the things with Reagan. Now these are pictures that I took of the way the town prepped for it. I guarantee they did not prep like this in 1927 or 1936 or 1948. I mean, who's the guy that hung from the elevator, hung those letters up there? I wouldn't do it. And I think this is Jeff Heights. Everybody remembers Jeff Heights on Channel 11? And so that's the news platform.
Hey, Ron.
Yeah.
Ron. Hung the letters on the.
You did it? Good. My hat's up. If I had a hat, my hat would be off too.
Who was it?
Who was it?
I work for
Brad Kitchen.
I work for Clive George.
Oh,
You guys put him up.
how old were you then?
19.
19 and didn't know any fear.
Oh my goodness.
Brad Kitchen's back in the corner there, and he said he was the one that did it. He was working for Clive George at the time. So they did it.
That's funny.
Now there's Jan Seaman and Susie Berkey when they worked for Wally. Because I worked for Wally, so I was there and I took their pictures of it, and everybody was into everybody got caught up in it. I mean, it was a big deal. There is another, I guarantee that's a Dwayne Rickard sign. And there's the PH band and the choir standing down there, a lot of people. I doubt that Dwayne did that. That looks like pre-printed by somebody. That would be up on top of the hotel.
Yeah.
And those binoculars, I said he could probably see all the way to past Hoytville. That's a Dwayne, because that's you can tell.
Yep.
So in the train pulled. On late afternoon of Friday, October 12th, 1984, Deshler had its final whistle-stop presidential visit as of today. The train was about 30 minutes late, with area Republicans doing some campaigning of their own prior to the arrival. Area high school bands, the PH choir, and even a couple of polka bands kept the crowd entertained while they waited for the train to arrive. President Reagan stood on the back platform of U.S. Car 1 as it pulled to a stop. There, Ferdinand Magellan. That's the car, but that's not the back, obviously. As it pulled to a stop, waving and greeting to supporters in the crowd. He then retreated into the train so as to be formally introduced by Congressman Delbert Latta. I took all these pictures. I had a pretty good spot. And I think Wally got that for me. I said, somebody gave him sign. He says, come on up here. So I had my camera, and this is back in the days of film, so I took a bunch of pictures and had kept my fingers crossed that they turned out. The Deshler flag editor, Stella Scharf, mentioned in her first person column, that's Paul's daughter, Delbert. There. In her first person column, that she was surprised in Mr. Reagan's appearance. She had read that some people thought that the president was looking old, especially after his lackluster performance at the previous week's debate with Walter Mondale. She said he actually looked 20 years younger than his actual age and appeared very healthy, excited, and vigorous. In his speech, he made mention of the Bavarian Club and the Deshler flag, and noted that he was taking the same route that Harry Truman took 36 years prior, stating that Truman was the last Democrat that he voted for. Because remember, he was Democrat and he became Republican.
That's right.
He spoke about what all of the previous candidates usually spoke to: farming, Social Security, taxes, and etc. When the crowd started chanting 4 more years, he waited until the crowd died down and said, "I'm game." It's a lot of people. We're getting there.
You're pretty close.
Ron,
Yo, what?
that was on a Friday, and to me, there wasn't school because of a school delay that day.
Oh.
And we came into town early in the morning, before it was all closed up, with the guys up on the roofs, check things out.
They were all over town. I mean, they were in the Barney household, I think, checking things out, weren't they? Did some of the Secret Service guys come see? They were. I know that Pam Walters said they were in Gene and Bessie Miller's, and well, Randy said that Dave got some things from that because the Secret Service guys were all over town checking
Hey,
things
Ron.
out. Oh, what?
I was actually stopped by the Secret Service.
Whoa.
You know where, I think it's a gun shop downtown?
Yeah.
And they have, well, John's grandfather used to own that, and it had that, those steps going up.
Yep.
Well, Matthew was 4 weeks old, and I had a whole bag full of, bottles, and I thought, I'm just gonna go up there and sit down. So I went about halfway out when I was feeding him. The next thing I knew, I grabbed,
Whoa.
and, which building would it have been? The paint store, I think.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it was Norton's paint store,
Yep.
and they brought me in there, and they started questioning me, and I'm thinking, I'm just gonna feed the baby. So they let me finish feeding him, and then said, "Do not go back up there."
Wow.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, he had
It
been
was
shot.
weird.
Deb Kressel Wright, and myself, we decided to go really early. We met in the town park, and we thought, well, let's just walk down the alleyway here. We went down the alleyway, and when we got to the bank, we decided to just cut through the alley by the bank. And we got to Main Street, and we were just standing there, and Secret Service was all over, because we had breached Main Street. Well, just like Lori said, we had, and they took us to the guy who was the head Secret Service,
Whoa.
and he told us that he was. And he wanted to know, how did we know that? And they were on walkie-talkies, and, they had for like a whole week been, in town and checking things out, and 2 Deshler girls, somehow snuck past the Secret Service.
Yeah. I can see that.
Yeah.
When you lived here, didn't have school, I remember I live in Holgate, and I took my daughter out of school to come, so Holgate had school, but PH must not have.
I like it. Thanks for coming on my birthday.
What's that?
It says most, but not all of the crowd was made up of Reagan supporters. And she noted that there were opposition signs and posters in the crowd, but mostly the crowd was supportive. When he finished this speech, he was presented a key to the village. Here's Andy.
David Johnson.
By then Mayor Andy Johnson.
I'm watching an David Johnson. Yeah, that's amazing.
He was really nervous. Because we were really close to
Oh,
them.
that's Andy, yeah.
Yep, that's Andy. And that's him presenting it. But I remember seeing Andy the day after, and he told me it was the thrill of a lifetime to meet the president, and that he was never going to wash his hand again, ever. And that's it.
Then he died.
That's the end. That's all I have.
Just like
He
that.
said, thanks for coming on my birthday. What is that?
It doesn't identify.
What day is it?
It is
It would have been
The 12th of October.
Huh?
October 12th.
That's fine. Was that you?
Was that your sign? And then
Oh, it might have been my sign, I don't know. I might have been that person.
Here we go.
No idea.
my brother. My brother.
Yeah,
yeah. That was a girl.
Wow, right.
Yeah.
You can't tell me that.
Oh, did it?
Walk up there, Marilyn. What did it say? Sandy, walk up there and see.
One of them was flexing his authority, so I thought I would flex my authority also. And I I said, we have mail that has to be dispatched at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. There won't be a truck, so if any vehicles coming in, and so we worked out a solution that they park down at the end where Christmas apartments are now. We deliver the hand and bags, carry the mail back behind the fire department in Christmas building, put them on the truck, and then sent them south out of town where they normally went back to town. That was the only way that we, that I'm gonna assert my authority and say mail must go through.
Mail must go out.
Yeah.
Rain, sleet, snow, or
Yep.
presidential visit, mail goes out. Do anybody else have some questions or comments for Ron?
Yeah, if you have questions, there's a good chance I won't know the answer.
I need to know who made this. I have managed to not break this since October 12, 1984. Somebody was selling these for 50 cents in the crowd.
Wow.
And they're just ceramic eggs. I can't read the name on the back, but it says Deshler Reagan Day on it.
Wow.
That is cool.
Anybody have a clue? Who would have made it?
Well, it seems like Linda
I
Jackson
can't-
made all those t-shirts.
I can't read the back.
She had Reagan, that's where she.
Yeah, really.
Could you repeat what she said? We couldn't hear back here.
What Lori said about the thing,
Yes.
she has a,
It's a ceramic egg that somebody was selling for like 50 cents in the crowd,
and it's lasted all this time.
and I haven't broken it. It's awesome.
And my husband was county commissioner at the time, and so we have the ticket, and he was on the train, and he got his picture taken with Reagan,
Mr. Youngie,
and then he sent it to us. So,
that's a really cool picture.
Yeah, that's
Very
right.
nice. Did you get it, Chris?
Yep.
Okay.
What's the name?
Jim Youngie, he was county commissioner at the time.
There's a good Nixon Museum story. Nixon's Museum is in California. We had the pleasure of visiting it several years ago, and there's quite a display about Vicki Cole.
Oh, really?
Unfortunately, the sign that described it spelled it Dashler.
Yeah, of course they do.
We caught it, and when we exited the museum, we commented to the people at the front desk, it's not D-A and so forth. Well, they thanked us. They said, we promised to change the sign, and about a month later, we got 4 tickets to the museum in the mail in Cincinnati.
Wow.
And my daughter, who still lived out there at that time, said that they in fact did change the sign.
Oh, well, that's neat.
D-E-S-H-L-E-R.
Very
Well, that's good. But yeah, I mean, when all that 1968 stuff hit, I mean, this town went crazy nuts. I mean, for like, well, between election and inauguration. At first, they didn't know that they were gonna get invited to the inauguration stuff. It was just, hey, this is great. They mentioned her and they mentioned the town and that was the hits. And then not long after that, then they received their invitations.
Ron, did the family ever write about their experiences, do you know?
I think I remember seeing, because Vicki either does or did live in Findlay.
Okay,
And I think in the Findlay Courier, maybe on a certain anniversary of that, she was interviewed.
okay.
And she was kind of hesitant about it. Like she didn't like the fame and the notoriety of it so much, you
Yeah,
know.
that's what I had always heard.
Forth right away. didn't
Yeah,
they?
because she did not come forth right away. I mean, they asked on the intercom at the school, okay, who can tell me who did it?
Remember that? Everybody knows.
So I hope that you learned a few new things about the presidential visits and presidential stops and presidential coming throughs that we had. I was surprised at how many different ones that I didn't know about. I mean, I didn't know about Herbert Hoover coming through here, and then that little clip that was a newspaper clip, that was in the Deshler flag. That wasn't from a different newspaper. So the flag reported about the spikes being pulled from the tracks. But nowadays, there'd be an investigation and we'd be doing all this and, you know, it'd be really something. But
Ron and I had talked about, when he was here the one day, practicing that, I don't know if we would ever see this again, with the train, just because of
Yeah,
security.
yeah.
And so that makes these things really special, because I don't think that this is something in
Yeah.
modern America that you're going to see much of again, so.
Go ahead.
No, not on trains, they couldn't secure that, but, I want to thank Ron for coming and doing this. I think we all enjoyed the program. And one more applause for Ron. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Couple things. We have